Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Tonight's story takes us to the Bondi, Sydney, Australia. And sure, for the horror fans won't to miss this. Let's dig into the mystery, if you dare. Bondi Beach, with its golden sands and crashing waves, is one of the most iconic destinations in Sydney, Australia. It's a place where people from all walks of life come to relax, surf, and enjoy the sun. Yet for all its beauty and serenity, there's an air of mystery that lingers over this well-known beach, an unsettling legend that has been whispered through the generations by the locals who call this place home. The tale begins many years ago, during the early 1900s, with a woman named Evelyn. She was known throughout Bondi as a stunning beauty, a woman whose elegance and grace captivated the hearts of men and the envy of women. Her long, flowing hair, dark as the midnight sky, shimmered like silk in the sunlight. Her skin was pale, almost glowing under the sun's warm embrace, a striking contrast to the deep blue of the ocean. But it wasn't just her appearance that caught the attention of those around her. It was the air of mystery that surrounded her, the way she moved through the world as though she were a part of something greater, something that couldn't be fully understood. Evelyn would often be seen walking alone along the shores of Bondi Beach, gazing out at the endless horizon. She would linger by the water's edge, her gaze fixed on the waves, as though she were searching for something far beyond the shores of the beach. To those who passed by, it seemed as if she were a vision, distant and unattainable, lost in her own world. The locals would talk about her in hushed tones, with some describing her as an ethereal being, someone who didn't quite belong to the world around her. Others spoke of her as if she were cursed, claiming that she was a woman bound to the ocean, destined to bring misfortune to those who crossed her path. No one really knew where Evelyn came from. She arrived in Bondi under mysterious circumstances, having been seen in the area only after the death of her husband. The official story was that he had tragically drowned while out on a sailing trip, but rumors spread that there was more to his death than met the eye. Evelyn never spoke of her late husband, and her sorrow seemed to consume her as she drifted through life, her beauty slowly turning into something haunting. The first whispers of something darker began when several men who had become enchanted by her vanished without a trace. These men, handsome and successful, were known for their charm and wit, but once they encountered Evelyn, they were never seen again. At first, people thought it was a coincidence. After all, it wasn't unusual for someone to fall off the grid in a place as vast and unrelenting as Bondi. But when more men disappeared, each one having had an encounter with Evelyn just days before their disappearance, the rumors began to take shape. Some said Evelyn had a power over men, a kind of spell that made them fall hopelessly in love with her, only for them to vanish without a trace. Others spoke of her as a temptress, someone who lured her victims into a false sense of security before leading them to their doom. There were even stories that the men had been found washed up on the shores of Bondi Beach, their bodies cold and lifeless, their faces frozen in expressions of horror. But the authorities could never confirm any of these suspicions. There were no signs of foul play, and the bodies seemed to have simply appeared, as if the ocean had claimed them for itself. The local fishermen had their own stories to tell, tales passed down from father to son, from grandfather to grandson. They spoke of how the sea itself seemed to respond to Evelyn, how the waves would grow violent whenever she came near the shore. On quiet nights, when the moon was full and the sky was clear, the fishermen would hear strange sounds coming from the water, soft whispers, like voices calling from the deep. They said it was Evelyn beckoning the sea to claim what was hers. Evelyn's presence on Bondi Beach became a curse to the men who ventured too close to her. One by one, the men who sought her out vanished, leaving behind only the faintest traces of their existence. The more time passed, the more people began to fear her. Her beauty, once admired, now became a symbol of death and despair. The once vibrant beach, which had been a haven for sunbathers and surfers, became a place to avoid after dark. Even the bravest of men hesitated to walk the sands alone, fearing that they too would fall under Evelyn's spell. As the years went by, Evelyn's mysterious aura only grew stronger. The whispers surrounding her became louder, and the fear of her presence took hold of the town. People would leave food and small offerings by the rocks at the edge of Bondi Beach, hoping to appease her and protect themselves from the curse she had unleashed. But no one knew what she wanted or what drove her to take the lives of those who dared to get close. Some claimed that Evelyn was simply a woman in mourning, that the loss of her husband had driven her to madness and caused her to seek out companionship in the wrong ways. Others believed that she had become a force of nature, a being so consumed by grief and longing that she had become something else entirely, a creature of the sea, neither fully human nor fully spirit, cursed to walk the shores for eternity. Despite the growing terror, there were still those who were drawn to Evelyn. Men would continue to seek her out, mesmerized by her beauty and the mystery that surrounded her. It was said that once a man looked into her eyes, he would be lost forever, unable to resist her pull. And those who were unlucky enough to fall under her gaze would never be seen again, their names lost to the winds and the waves. Some say that Evelyn still walks the shores of Bondi Beach to this day, her figure glimpsed by those brave enough to venture out in the dead of night. They say she lingers near the water, waiting for the next victim to come close enough for her to claim. The stories of her haunting still circulate in hushed tones among the locals, and Bondi Beach, despite its beauty, remains forever shadowed by the legend of the Black Widow. As time passed, the tale of Evelyn became more than just a local legend. It became a warning, a reminder of the dangers that lay beneath the surface, waiting to ensnare those who were too curious or too reckless. Bondi Beach, once a place of relaxation and joy, was now a place of fear, a place where the line between reality and the supernatural blurred, and where the Black Widow waited patiently for her next victim to fall under her spell. For those who dared to ask about Evelyn, the locals would only shake their heads and mutter, "She's still out there. She'll never leave." And in the distance, the waves would crash against the rocks as if to prove that the legend of Bondi's Black Widow was far from over. It was a warm summer evening when Jack first saw her. He had come to Sydney to take a break from the grind of his life back home. He was eager to explore the vibrant city, but it was Bondi Beach that had captivated him. The golden sand stretched endlessly under the setting sun, and the waves crashing along the shore created a rhythm that seemed almost hypnotic. He'd heard all about Bondi's lively atmosphere, but there was something serene and calming about it that made him feel like he had finally found a place to relax. Jack had only been at Bondi Beach for a few days, but it already felt like home. He had spent the past couple of days soaking in the sights, wandering along the coast, and enjoying the local food. But this evening was different. As he strolled along the beach, enjoying the warm breeze and the sound of the ocean, his eyes were drawn to a figure standing by the rocks, gazing out at the water. It was a woman. At first, Jack didn't think much of it, but something about her caught his attention. She stood tall, her back straight, and her presence commanding despite the solitude. Her long, dark hair flowed like silk in the wind, and the soft light of the setting sun bathed her face in a gentle glow. But it wasn't just her beauty that drew him in. There was something otherworldly about her, a mysterious aura that seemed to set her apart from everyone else on the beach. Jack hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should approach. He wasn't the type of person to strike up conversations with strangers, but there was something about this woman that made him feel like he had to know her. Something deep within him urged him to step forward. He took a deep breath and walked towards her, unsure of what he was going to say. When he was close enough, he cleared his throat, hoping to catch her attention. "Hey," he said, trying to sound casual. "It's a beautiful evening, isn't it?" The woman turned to face him, and for a moment, Jack felt like time had stopped. Her eyes were piercing, almost unnerving, but they held a certain warmth. There was something undeniably captivating about the way she looked at him. She smiled, a smile that seemed both kind and mysterious at the same time. "Yes, it is," she replied in a soft voice that seemed to carry a note of sadness. "The ocean is always more beautiful when you don't have to share it with anyone else." Jack wasn't sure what to make of her words, but they struck a chord with him. He smiled back, trying to make light of the conversation. "I'm Jack," he said, extending his hand. The woman's gaze softened, and she looked down at his hand for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "Evelyn," she said quietly, taking his hand in hers. Her touch was colder than he expected, but he dismissed it as a trick of the evening air. Over the next few days, Jack found himself spending more and more time with Evelyn. They would meet along the beach, walk for hours, and talk about everything and nothing. Jack was fascinated by her. She was different from anyone he had ever met. Her presence was magnetic, drawing him in like a moth to a flame. Her voice was like a melody, soothing and calming, but there was an underlying sadness in it that he couldn't quite place. As they spent more time together, Jack started to feel a deep connection with her. It was as though they had known each other forever. They shared stories of their lives, of their hopes and their fears. Evelyn spoke of her past in a way that made Jack feel like he was part of something far greater than himself. Yet her stories always seemed incomplete, as if she were holding something back. But Jack was too enchanted by her to ask too many questions. The days turned into nights, and Jack found himself looking forward to their walks along the beach more than anything else. He began to feel a pull towards Evelyn that he couldn't explain, a sense of longing that grew stronger with each passing day. She had become the center of his world, and he couldn't help but feel that there was something special about their connection. He started to imagine a future with her, one where they could escape the pressures of the world and live together in peace, just the two of them, by the ocean. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky painted itself in shades of orange and purple, Jack decided it was time to take the next step. He had been thinking about it for days, but now, more than ever, he was sure he was in love with Evelyn. He had to tell her. He asked her to meet him at a secluded part of the beach, away from the crowds. It was a spot they had discovered together, a quiet place where the only sounds were the crashing waves and the wind. It was there, under the vast sky, that Jack intended to confess his feelings. When Evelyn arrived, she seemed different. She was still beautiful, of course, but there was something about her that seemed off. Her smile was faint, almost forced, and her eyes, which had always been warm and inviting, now seemed distant, cold even. Jack dismissed it as nerves. After all, he was about to confess his love to her. He couldn't blame her for being nervous too. "Evelyn," he began, his voice shaking slightly with anticipation. "There's something I've been wanting to say." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. The wind blew through her hair, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world had stopped moving. It was just the two of them, standing on the edge of the world. Jack's heart raced as he took a step closer to her. "I've fallen in love with you," Jack said, his words coming out in a rush. "I don't know how or when it happened, but I can't deny it anymore. I love you, Evelyn. I want to be with you, always." Evelyn didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, staring at him with those cold, empty eyes. Jack could feel the air growing heavier around them, the chill of the night settling in despite the warmth of the summer evening. The world felt like it was closing in on him, and he suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed. Evelyn's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't the warm smile he remembered. It was something darker, something colder. "You shouldn't have said that," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. Before Jack could respond, the air around them seemed to shift. The wind picked up, howling through the beach, as though the ocean itself had come alive. The temperature dropped sharply, and Jack shivered despite himself. His heart began to pound in his chest as the ground beneath him felt like it was shaking. Suddenly, everything went dark. It was as if the night itself had swallowed him whole. One moment, he was, and then, just as suddenly as it had all started, the world went silent. Jack didn't know how much time had passed, but when he finally opened his eyes, he was no longer on the beach. The warm summer night had disappeared, replaced by a cold, oppressive darkness. His surroundings were unfamiliar, the air thick and heavy with an eerie stillness. He tried to move, but his body felt stiff and unresponsive. Panic set in. Where was he? What had happened? Evelyn's face, with its cold smile and lifeless eyes, flashed in his mind. He realized with a sinking feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. He had confessed his love, but Evelyn was not the woman he thought she was. She was something else entirely, something dangerous and twisted. As the darkness closed in around him, Jack understood one thing. He had fallen into her trap, and now there was no way out. The morning after Jack's fateful encounter with Evelyn, the beach was quiet, the waves still crashing gently against the shore. But as the sun rose higher into the sky, it brought no warmth or comfort to the people of Bondi. There was a distinct chill in the air, one that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the kind of cold that crept under your skin, making you feel like something was wrong, like something had shifted in the world and no one could quite put their finger on it. Jack had not returned to his hotel. At first, his absence seemed like a small thing, something that might be explained away by the late hours of the night before. But as the hours dragged on, the worry set in. His family back home tried calling, but no answer. His friends, knowing the adventurous spirit Jack had, assumed he had simply gone for a late-night walk on the beach or had met someone new. But by the afternoon, when he still had not returned, the worry turned into a deep, gnawing anxiety. The authorities were called in. The police arrived at the beach, conducting searches up and down the coastline. They questioned locals, asking if they had seen anything unusual, anyone acting strangely, or perhaps a man who might have wandered off. The idea that Jack could have just gone for a swim and drowned was the easiest explanation, but no one could confirm it. No one had seen him in the water. No one had seen anything that could explain his sudden disappearance. The search continued for days, The police combed the area, scouring the sand and rocks. But there was no sign of Jack. No footprints. No belongings. Not even a scrap of clothing. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, swallowed by the ocean itself. His family and friends were desperate. They reached out to anyone who might help, offering rewards for information. But still, no one could explain where Jack had gone. The town of Bondi, once vibrant and full of life, began to feel suffocating. It was as if the very air had thickened with tension, and the usual carefree nature of the beachgoers seemed muted. People started to look at each other nervously, whispering behind closed doors, unsure of what to believe anymore. There were those who believed the explanation the police had given. Jack had drowned, simple as that. But for those who had lived in Bondi long enough, there was a sinking feeling in their stomachs, a dread that crept into their hearts when they thought of Jack's disappearance. Deep down, they knew the truth. This was no accident. This was no drowning. The legend of Evelyn, the Black Widow of Bondi, had claimed another victim. The rumors began to spread like wildfire. At first, it was just speculation. The kind of gossip you'd hear over a cup of coffee or on a walk along the beach. But soon, the whispers grew louder, darker. Some said Jack had run off with someone, that he had fallen for a woman who was as mysterious as she was beautiful. There were even those who claimed to have heard strange sounds on the beach that night. Distant cries, like the sound of someone calling for help, followed by eerie silence. As the days turned into weeks and the search efforts were called off, the whispers grew into something else: fear. People started to stay away from Bondi Beach after dark, afraid that they too might become the next victim. Some left the area altogether, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. And all the while, Evelyn seemed to vanish from sight, as though she too had become part of the legend. Her beauty, her charm, everything that had once drawn people to her, now felt like a curse, a warning of danger to anyone who dared to approach her. But it wasn't just Jack who had disappeared. Over the years, other young men came and went, each one drawn by the allure of Bondi, each one captured by Evelyn's charm, and each one vanishing without a trace. Some were visitors to the city, just like Jack, while others were locals, familiar faces that disappeared so suddenly that their absence seemed to ripple through the community like a stone thrown into still water. Every time one of these men vanished, the people of Bondi grew quieter, more afraid. They whispered to each other, warning their sons and their brothers to be careful, to stay away from the beach after dark. But even that didn't seem to help. No one really knew how it happened, only that it did. There were no bodies, no clues left behind, no sign of struggle. It was as though these men had simply walked into the night and never returned. And the only common thread in their disappearances was Evelyn. She was beautiful, captivating, and so mysterious that no one could resist her. But what was the price for her charm? It seemed that anyone who fell under her spell was doomed to vanish without a trace. The stories about her began to grow more twisted with each passing year. Some said she was a ghost, an apparition haunting the beach for eternity, drawn to men who had come seeking love. Others said she had made some sort of pact with the ocean, a dark bargain that allowed her to take the lives of those who dared to approach her. Whatever the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. Evelyn had become a symbol of fear, a warning whispered from one person to the next. As more men disappeared, the pattern became undeniable. No one dared to speak her name aloud, but everyone knew who was responsible. The Black Widow of Bondi had claimed another victim, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop her. The beach that had once been a place of freedom and joy had turned into something darker, a place where men vanished, swallowed by the waves, with no one to mourn them. Those who had once been drawn to the beauty of Bondi Beach now stayed away, unwilling to risk falling into the same trap that had ensnared so many others before them. The locals, however, knew the real story. They knew that Evelyn was not just a woman, but something more. Something ancient and dangerous, a force that had existed long before they had ever set foot on the beach. They whispered that she was cursed, that her beauty was a trap, and that anyone who looked into her eyes would never be the same again. But as much as they feared her, no one could resist the lure of her presence. She was the stuff of legends, and legends, no matter how terrifying, always had a way of pulling people in. And so, life in Bondi went on, but it was never the same. The disappearance of Jack marked the beginning of a new era in the town, one marked by fear and uncertainty. People learned to live with the stories, with the whispers, with the dread that hung in the air like a heavy fog. They would go on with their lives, but they would never forget the truth, that somewhere, hidden in the shadows of Bondi Beach, Evelyn was waiting for the next man who would fall for her spell, waiting for the next victim to become a part of her endless legacy. No one spoke her name, but everyone knew. Evelyn, the Black Widow of Bondi, was always watching, always waiting. And as long as the ocean continued to crash against the shore, her presence would haunt the beach, a reminder of the men who had disappeared and the truth that no one dared to acknowledge. Years passed since the mysterious disappearances at Bondi Beach, and the whispers that had once filled the town faded into the background, replaced by the more mundane concerns of daily life. The legend of Evelyn, the Black Widow, became nothing more than an unsettling tale told in hushed voices over drinks or around campfires. But not everyone was content to let the story be relegated to folklore. One woman, a journalist named Rachel, was determined to uncover the truth behind the eerie stories that had haunted the beach for so long. Rachel had heard about Bondi's dark history before, having come across a handful of articles and old interviews mentioning Evelyn's name in connection to a series of disappearances. What intrigued her the most, however, wasn't the idea of ghosts or supernatural forces. She was fascinated by the possibility that there was a deeper, more logical explanation to the events, something that the locals had failed to uncover. In her mind, the tales of Evelyn could be explained by something more human, more understandable. Rachel's determination to uncover the truth led her to Bondi, where she hoped to unravel the mystery once and for all. Upon arriving, Rachel was met with the cool, crisp air of the Australian coast. The beach was as beautiful as everyone had said, with the sparkling blue waves rolling gently onto the shore and the golden sand stretching as far as the eye could see. The locals were friendly, but wary when she mentioned her interest in the story of Evelyn. "You'll be better off not asking about her," one elderly man had warned her, his eyes filled with a deep, almost personal fear. "Some things are better left in the past. Trust me, young lady, you don't want to know what happened here." Rachel didn't take the warning to heart. She was a journalist, after all, and had spent years chasing down stories that others were too afraid to touch. She wasn't about to let a few old-timers scare her away from uncovering the truth. One evening, after a long day of interviews with locals and gathering information from old records, Rachel decided to visit Bondi Beach herself. She had read about the eerie beauty of the place at night when the crowds had gone home, and she was curious to see it for herself. The setting sun painted the sky in vibrant hues of pink and orange, casting a warm golden glow across the sand. It was peaceful, tranquil, nothing like the ominous tales she had heard. Still, something felt off. As Rachel walked along the edge of the beach, the wind gently tousling her hair, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she looked out at the vast ocean. The waves, which had seemed so calming during the day, now appeared more menacing, their deep blue color darkening with the coming night. She had read about how the locals believed the ocean to be an entity of its own, one that had a connection to the strange occurrences at the beach, and Rachel couldn't help but wonder if there was any truth to those stories. Then in the distance, she saw her, the figure of a woman, standing near the rocks where the waves crashed the hardest. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. The woman's silhouette was unmistakable. It was Evelyn. She stood tall, her long, dark hair flowing in the wind, her face turned toward the ocean. It was as though time had stood still. The legend she had read about, the stories people had whispered in fear, seemed to come alive before her eyes. Rachel hesitated for only a moment. She had come here to confront the truth, and here was her chance. She couldn't let this moment slip away. With her curiosity piqued and her mind racing, she stepped forward, walking slowly toward the woman on the beach. As Rachel drew closer, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Evelyn's beauty was undeniable, but there was something in her posture, something about the way she stood that made Rachel feel uneasy. She looked as if she were waiting for something or someone. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, as if she were lost in a world far beyond this one. But as Rachel approached, the woman turned, her eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made Rachel's breath catch in her throat. Evelyn smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile Rachel had expected. It was cold, predatory. "You're not scared, are you?" Evelyn's voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried through the night air like a command. Rachel's heart raced, her instincts telling her to turn and run. But she refused to show fear. She had come for answers, and she wasn't about to back down now. "I'm not afraid of you," Rachel replied, her voice a little shakier than she intended. She tried to keep her composure, but the chill that had crept into the air made her feel small, insignificant. Evelyn's smile faded, and her eyes grew cold, vacant. For a brief moment, Rachel thought she saw something else in them. Something dark, something ancient. "You should be," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the waves. "You'll be the next to join them." Rachel's blood ran cold. The air around her seemed to freeze, and she suddenly felt as though the world itself had shifted. The temperature dropped sharply, and the wind picked up, howling through the beach as though it were alive. Rachel's heartbeat thudded in her chest as she took a step back, but it felt like the ground beneath her was shifting. The sand beneath her feet seemed to tremble, as if the earth itself was responding to Evelyn's presence. The sky, which had once been so bright and colorful, now seemed to darken, the horizon turning a deep shade of purple. The once gentle waves now crashed against the shore with violent force, their sound growing louder and more menacing. Rachel could hear something in the distance, whispers, faint voices calling out to her from the dark expanse of the beach. It sounded like the voices of men, their calls filled with fear, their pleas for help echoing through the air. But when Rachel turned to look, there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. "Help me. Help us." Rachel's head spun. The ground beneath her feet seemed to sway, and she felt dizzy, as though the very world were slipping away. She reached out to steady herself, but it felt as though she were being pulled towards something dark, something that had been waiting for her. She could hear Evelyn's soft laughter in the distance, but it wasn't the sound of joy. It was cruel, haunting. "They never leave," Evelyn whispered again, her voice echoing in Rachel's mind. "They belong to me now." Suddenly, the air grew ice cold, and Rachel felt a sharp pain in her chest. She gasped, her breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. The ground beneath her feet shook violently, and the world around her blurred, as if everything was dissolving into darkness. Before Rachel could even scream, everything went black. She fell to the ground, her body going limp as the voices and whispers continued to swirl around her. The last thing she remembered was the sound of waves crashing and a soft, distant whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, all at once. "You're mine now, Rachel." When she awoke, it was as if nothing had happened. The air was still warm, the waves gently lapping at the shore. But everything felt wrong. She was no longer on the beach. The world around her was completely different, and the unease she had felt before had only grown stronger. The once familiar beach now felt foreign, distant, as if it belonged to another world. The feeling of being watched crept up on her, and she realized, with horror, that she was no longer alone. Something was with her, something she couldn't see but could feel. She tried to move, to scream, but nothing came out. It was as if she had been silenced, as if the very act of trying to resist had been drained from her. And then, in the distance, she saw it, the figure of Evelyn, standing at the edge of the horizon, smiling as though she had won. Rachel had come seeking the truth, but she had found only terror. The curse of the Black Widow was real, and now Rachel was a part of it, bound to the beach for eternity. As the darkness closed in around her, Rachel understood too late that Evelyn's charm wasn't just a lure, it was a curse, one that claimed all who fell for it, pulling them into an endless, suffocating night. When Rachel awoke, the first thing she noticed was the warmth of the sun on her skin. For a moment, everything seemed normal, almost too normal. The waves were still crashing against the shore, and the air carried the familiar scent of salt water. She slowly opened her eyes and sat up, feeling the soft sand beneath her fingers. But something was wrong. Something had shifted, and she couldn't quite understand what had happened or how she had ended up here. Her heart was racing. Her body felt drained, as though she had been through something far more exhausting than just a sleepless night on the beach. The lingering coldness, the strange whispers that had filled her ears just moments before, were gone, but they left a palpable heaviness in the air. The unease in her chest wouldn't dissipate, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. Something that was still watching her, lurking just out of sight. Rachel struggled to get her bearings. The memory of what she had experienced only hours ago, like a distant nightmare, she couldn't fully grasp. She stood up, brushing sand off her clothes, and for a brief moment, she considered walking back to her hotel. The beach was now empty, the crowds of tourists and locals gone, leaving only the quiet hum of the ocean. But the sense of foreboding that gripped her heart stopped her from moving. The image of Evelyn, standing there, with that chilling smile, haunted her thoughts. She had to know more about this woman, this curse, if she were to make sense of what had happened. Rachel hurried back to her hotel, her mind racing as she pushed through the door. She felt a sense of urgency she couldn't explain. She quickly grabbed her laptop and began searching for any information she could find on Evelyn, the Black Widow of Bondi. She found the usual rumors, whispers from the locals, people who had lived in Bondi for years and had their own suspicions about what had happened, but no concrete answers. Every article, every interview left more questions than it answered. But one thing was clear. Evelyn wasn't just some tragic figure in a story. There was something far more sinister about her. Rachel continued to dig, feeling the weight of each new discovery pressing down on her. It was then that she found the first real lead, a private journal entry from a woman who had known Evelyn years ago. The entry, dated more than a century ago, painted a picture of a life that seemed to belong to a different world, a world of wealth, beauty, and privilege. Evelyn, it seemed, had once been a woman of great means, living a life of luxury that many would envy. Her family had been well known, respected, and powerful, and she had everything a woman could want. But even in this world of opulence, there was a shadow hanging over her. Rachel read on, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through the document. It was said that Evelyn had fallen deeply in love with a man, someone she thought was her soulmate. They were inseparable, or so it seemed. The love they shared was the talk of the town, and it seemed that nothing could break their bond. But Evelyn's happiness was short-lived. One day, without warning, her lover betrayed her. It wasn't just an affair. It was a complete and utter betrayal, one that shattered her heart and left her a shell of the woman she had once been. A man once so devoted to her abandoned Evelyn without explanation. He left for another woman, another life, leaving Evelyn broken and abandoned. The pain she felt was beyond words. It was a grief that consumed her, a grief so deep and all-encompassing that it turned into something darker. Anger began to take root in her heart, twisting the love she had once felt into something darker and far more dangerous. Evelyn could not and would not forgive the man who had torn her heart apart. And from that moment on, her love transformed into a vengeful obsession. Her heart hardened, and the grief that had once seemed so pure turned into a burning desire for revenge. In the depths of her soul, Evelyn swore to make any man who dared to love her suffer the same fate. She would exact her revenge on those who came close, those who might fall for her charm and beauty. And thus, her curse was born. Rachel's fingers trembled as she read the final entry in the journal. It was clear that Evelyn's torment was far from over. The curse had taken root, and it spread like a poison through her very being. Evelyn was no longer a woman capable of love. She had become something else, a creature of vengeance, driven by an insatiable hunger to punish the men who dared to love her, and every man who fell under her spell was doomed to meet the same horrific end. They would be drawn in by her beauty, captivated by her charm, only to vanish without a trace, their lives claimed by the curse that Evelyn had set into motion. The journal entry ended with a chilling sentence. Evelyn's soul will never rest, her love twisted by vengeance. Anyone who falls for her will never escape the fate she has set for them. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling from the revelation. She felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Evelyn's curse had been born out of heartbreak, out of the desire for revenge, and it had lived on for generations, claiming victims one after another, drawing them into its deadly embrace. The men who had disappeared weren't just victims of a woman's love. They were victims of a deep, unrelenting curse that had no end, no escape. Rachel knew now that she couldn't walk away from this. She had to stop Evelyn's curse, had to break the cycle before more lives were claimed. But how? How could she fight something so powerful, something that had endured for so long? She had to understand Evelyn completely, had to find out what made her tick, what kept her bound to the beach, to the ocean, to the curse that had tormented so many. Rachel spent the next few days interviewing more locals, piecing together more fragments of Evelyn's past. What she learned was disturbing. The woman who had once been so full of life, so full of love, was now a shadow of that person. Her heart had turned to stone, her love twisted into something dark and dangerous. There was no way to undo the damage that had been done to her, no way to heal the wounds that had festered for so long. But there had to be a way to stop the curse. Rachel's research led her to an ancient legend, one that spoke of a soul that could never rest unless it had taken enough lives to feed its rage. Evelyn, it seemed, was bound to this legend. Her heartache had opened a door, one that she had been unwilling or unable to close. And the curse she had unleashed was the result. Her obsession with revenge had condemned her, and now every man who crossed her path would be consumed by it. The more Rachel delved into Evelyn's past, the more she realized that there was only one way to end the curse. Evelyn's pain, her anger, her desire for revenge had to be confronted head-on. She had to be stopped, not just for the sake of the men who had vanished, but for the sake of her own soul, which had been lost to the darkness for far too long. The more Rachel learned, the more determined she became. She had to go back to Bondi Beach to confront Evelyn herself. But this time, she wasn't going alone. Armed with the knowledge of Evelyn's tragic past, Rachel was ready to face the Black Widow of Bondi and put an end to the curse that had haunted the beach for so many years. It wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about breaking the cycle, freeing the souls that had been lost to Evelyn's vengeance, and ensuring that no more lives would be claimed by her curse. The Black Widow's reign of terror had to end, and Rachel would be the one to do it. Rachel had spent countless hours researching Evelyn, the Black Widow of Bondi. The deeper she dug into the woman's history, the more she understood that this was no ordinary ghost story, no mere tale spun by frightened locals. Evelyn's curse was real, and it had to be stopped before even more innocent lives were claimed. She had learned enough to know that the only way to end it was to face the source of the curse itself. She had to go back to Bondi Beach, confront Evelyn, and break the cycle of vengeance that had held her captive for so long. The sun was setting as Rachel walked down to the beach. The sky was painted in shades of purple and orange, casting a serene glow over the water. The beach was mostly empty now, the tourists having left for the night, leaving only the sound of the waves and the soft rustling of the wind in the trees. Rachel could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. This would be her final confrontation with Evelyn, the moment when everything would either end or spiral out of control. She had to be strong. She had to see this through, no matter what. Rachel stood at the water's edge, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The ocean seemed endless, as though it stretched forever into the night. And the darkness beyond the shore felt more oppressive than ever. There was an eerie stillness to the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The sense of foreboding that had plagued her since her first encounter with Evelyn was stronger than ever. She could almost feel the presence of the Black Widow, lurking somewhere just out of sight, watching, waiting. And she heard it, the faint sound of footsteps behind her. Rachel's heart skipped a beat, and she froze. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The air around her had grown colder, and she felt a sudden pressure on her chest, like something was closing in on her. Slowly, she turned, and there she was. Evelyn stood at the edge of the beach, just a few feet away, as beautiful and haunting as ever. But there was something different about her now. The look in her eyes was no longer one of sadness or longing. It was filled with rage. "You can't escape," Evelyn hissed, her voice low and filled with malice. "You'll never leave Bondi. This is where you belong, just like the others." Rachel's heart raced, but she refused to let fear take hold of her. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. She stood tall, meeting Evelyn's gaze with unwavering determination. "I know your secret," Rachel said, her voice steady but firm. "Your curse ends with me." The words hung in the air between them. And for a brief moment, Evelyn seemed to falter. There was a flicker of something, maybe disbelief, maybe fear, in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a twisted smile, one that sent a chill down Rachel's spine. Evelyn's form shimmered slightly, as though her very presence was tied to the shifting shadows of the beach. "You think you can stop me," she sneered. "You think you can break my curse? You're just like all the others. You'll never leave Bondi. Once you've crossed me, you belong to the ocean, to me." Rachel took a deep breath, the weight of her words still ringing in her ears. "No," she said, her voice stronger now. "I won't be a part of this anymore. This ends now." Without waiting for Evelyn to respond, Rachel turned and began to walk towards the rocks. She had learned from her research that the key to breaking the curse lay in these ancient stones, hidden among the craggy cliffs where the waves crashed the hardest. The markings on the rocks were centuries old, symbols carved deep into the stone, ones that had been there long before Evelyn had ever come to Bondi Beach. The symbols were the key to ending the curse, the key to releasing Evelyn's soul from the grip of her eternal vengeance. As Rachel neared the rocks, she felt the air grow heavier, thick with an unnatural energy. The whispers she had heard before, those haunting voices of the men who had disappeared, began to fill her ears again. They were louder now, more urgent, their words unintelligible, but filled with pain and longing. They were the lost souls, trapped by Evelyn's curse, begging for release. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift and tremble, as though the earth itself was alive, responding to the power that Evelyn had unleashed. Rachel reached the rock where the symbols were carved. Her hand hovered over the deep grooves, tracing the ancient markings with her fingers. The moment her skin made contact with the stone, a surge of energy shot through her. The air around her seemed to crackle with power, and she gasped, stumbling back as the force of it nearly knocked her off her feet. It felt like the very fabric of reality was warping around her, as though she were standing at the threshold of two worlds. And then Evelyn's voice pierced the air, a scream of fury that echoed across the beach. "No!" she shouted, her voice rising to a fever pitch. "You can't do this! You're mine! You belong to me!" Rachel gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay focused. She could feel the darkness rising around her, the weight of it pressing in from all sides. But she refused to let it overwhelm her. She had come this far. She had uncovered the truth. Now she had to finish what she had started. With all the strength she could muster, Rachel pressed her hand firmly against the stone. The energy surged again, but this time, it didn't push her away. It seemed to align with her, flowing through her body, connecting her to the very heart of the curse. The ground beneath her shook violently, and the waves crashed harder against the rocks. The very sky seemed to darken, the stars obscured by an unnatural blackness that consumed the horizon. But Rachel didn't falter. She couldn't. As the energy built to a crescendo, Evelyn's screams grew more desperate, more frantic. The ground trembled beneath Rachel's feet, and the air grew thick with darkness, but she held her ground. The symbols on the stone glowed faintly, and she could feel the pull of Evelyn's power beginning to wane. The curse was weakening. It was finally breaking. Suddenly, there was a deafening silence. Everything stopped. The wind, the waves, the whispers, all of it ceased, as though the world had come to a standstill. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she looked up, but Evelyn was gone. There was no trace of her, no sign of the woman who had haunted Bondi Beach for so long. The air felt lighter now, as though a great weight had been lifted from the world. Rachel stood there, her hand still resting on the stone. Her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could feel the energy in the air shifting, settling into a peaceful calm. The curse had been broken. Evelyn's soul was finally free. And as Rachel turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different now. The beach, once dark and full of fear, now felt peaceful, as if the ocean itself had sighed in relief. The whispers had faded, and the weight of the curse had been lifted. Bondi Beach would never be the same again, but neither would Rachel. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The Black Widow of Bondi was no more. As she walked away from the rocks, the sun began to rise, casting a soft golden light over the beach. For the first time in a long time, Rachel felt at peace. She had uncovered the truth, faced the curse head-on, and broken it. The souls of the lost men could finally rest, and Evelyn's long reign of terror had come to an end. The beach was quiet now. The ocean, once a place of fear, had become a symbol of release, of freedom. Rachel smiled to herself, knowing that she had done something that would forever change Bondi Beach. And with that, she walked away, the sun rising behind her, and the weight of the past finally lifting from her shoulders.